a clot-dissolving drug that we sometimes use to treat stroke. Some stroke patients may benefit from this treatment, but TPA has definite limitations.
First, it must be given as quickly as possible. Additionally, some people may be harmed by its use.
This is why we tell everyone to call 911 if they have signs of stroke.
Unexplained clumsiness.
Loss of coordination with simple tasks like buttoning your shirt or holding your cup of coffee.
Trouble forming words.
And especially weakness or numbness on just one side of your body.
By seeing all stroke patients as quickly as possible in the ER, we might be able to help some people who may benefit from early treatment.
Stroke can be a debilitating disease.
Most of the healing from stroke requires relearning how to speak, move, and walk, even how to eat. That's why it's so important to work on being healthy first, so you can protect yourself from